Welcome. What you are about to watch is not science fiction, and it is not folklore. It is a serious investigation into one of history's most compelling unresolved questions: the mystery of men in black. What witnesses actually reported before the movie existed. Across the world, in universities, research institutes, and field excavations, serious scholars are wrestling with evidence that does not fit the accepted story. Evidence that has been documented, measured, and peer-reviewed, and that still has no satisfying conventional explanation. We are going to look at that evidence carefully, without prejudice in either direction. Not dismissing what is extraordinary, but not accepting it without scrutiny either. The truth, as always, is in the details. In 1953, Albert K. Bender was running the International Flying Saucer Bureau from Bridgeport, Connecticut, one of the more active civilian UFO research organizations in America. Then three men came to see him. They wore black suits. They knew things about his research that he had not published. They warned him to stop. Bender shut down the bureau immediately, telling associates only that he had been visited by men who knew the truth about flying saucers and had silenced him. He refused to say more for years. Bender's case was not unique. In 1947, Harold Dahl reported seeing UFOs over Maury Island in Washington state and claimed a man in black subsequently warned him not to discuss what he had seen. Through the 1960s and 1970s, the researcher John Keel documented dozens of independent cases sharing a distinctive profile: pale skin, black suits, black Cadillacs, stilted mechanical speech, and an apparent unfamiliarity with ordinary objects and social conventions. Witnesses described the MIB as seeming physically wrong, not quite human, or human and ill at the same time. All of this was documented before Will Smith made it funny in 1997. The question is what these witnesses actually encountered and why the descriptions are so consistent. This is where our investigation begins. Stay with us, because the further we go into the evidence, the more extraordinary it becomes. The story you think you know is only the surface. Beneath it lies something far more remarkable. Let us begin. Before we examine the specific evidence, we need to step back and understand the context. This case does not exist in isolation. It sits within the world of history's most enduring unsolved crimes, and to properly evaluate what we are looking at, we need to understand the broader picture that surrounds it. Amateur investigation of cold cases has undergone a revolution in the digital age. What once required physical access to evidence, e-rooms, courthouse archives, and retired detectives now requires, in many cases, only an internet connection and a willingness to spend several hundred hours reading. Online communities dedicated to specific cases have grown to tens of thousands of members, coordinating the analysis of evidence across continents and time zones, cross-referencing witness accounts, and applying analytical frameworks drawn from criminology, forensic accounting, and intelligence analysis. This democratization of investigation has produced real results. Amateur researchers have identified previously overlooked evidence in multiple high-profile cases. Citizen DNA investigations have generated viable leads that professional investigators subsequently pursued. Open-source intelligence techniques, originally developed for geopolitical analysis, have been applied to cold cases with unexpected success, identifying locations from historical photographs, tracking financial transactions through public records, and de-mapping suspect movements through period documents. But amateur investigation has also produced harm. Innocent people have been named online as suspects by communities whose enthusiasm outran their evidence. Families of victims have been subjected to intrusive and sometimes harassing contact from self-appointed investigators. Evidence has been disturbed by unauthorized site visits. The power of collective human intelligence, when applied to genuine mystery, is remarkable. The question is whether it can be channeled in ways that help rather than harm the living people caught in the blast radius of historical crimes. This context matters because it tells us something important. What we are about to investigate is not an isolated curiosity. It is part of a pattern that researchers in multiple fields have been independently documenting for decades, and patterns in science demand explanation. With that foundation in place, let us now turn to the specific case at hand. Now we reach the heart of the matter, the core evidence surrounding Men in Black. What witnesses actually reported before the movie existed is more extensive, more verified, and more troubling for conventional explanations than most people realize. Let us walk through it systematically, fact by fact, and allow the evidence to speak for itself. We are not going to speculate here. Every point that follows is documented in peer-reviewed publications, official archaeological records, or government archives that are publicly accessible. The question is not whether these facts are real. The question is what they mean. Consider this first extraordinary detail. Harold Dahl's Maury Island encounter in June 1947 is the earliest documented MIB report. Dahl claimed to have witnessed disc-shaped craft over Maury Island, Washington, and to have been visited the following morning by a man in a black suit who knew details of the sighting Dahl had not publicized. The man warned Dahl not to discuss what he had seen. The Maury Island case is controversial, and some investigators consider elements of it a hoax, but it established the basic MIB template that would recur in subsequent reports for decades. This single data point, if taken in isolation, might be set aside. Anomalies happen, instruments malfunction, researchers make mistakes, but as we continue, you will see that this is not an isolated anomaly. It is part of a consistent and documented pattern. But that is only the beginning. Researchers also discovered Albert K. Bender founded the International Flying Saucer Bureau in 1952 and published a newsletter called Space Review. In 1953, he abruptly shut down the bureau, citing a visit from 3 men in dark suits who he said knew the truth about flying saucers. Bender remained silent about the details until 1962, when he published a book describing the visitors as not entirely human. His shutdown of an active organization without explanation attracted significant attention in early UFO research communities. Now, a skeptic might propose an alternative explanation for this, and that is entirely reasonable. We should always test alternative explanations before accepting extraordinary ones. The problem is that the alternative explanations, when examined carefully, create more problems than they solve. The mystery deepens when we examine. John Keel investigated and documented MIB cases throughout the 1960s and 1970s, publishing findings in books including Strange Creatures from Time and Space, 1970, and The Mothman Prophecies, 1975. Keel interviewed dozens of witnesses who reported MIB visits and noted consistent characteristics. The men appeared pale or jaundiced, spoke in a stilted or mechanical manner, blinked unusually often, seemed unfamiliar with ordinary objects such as food and pens, and drove large black American cars, typically Cadillacs. This is where the conventional account begins to strain. Each individual fact might be dismissed or minimized in isolation. But the cumulative weight of the evidence is another matter entirely. Perhaps most remarkable of all, the physical descriptions witnesses gave of MIB are notably inconsistent with professional government agents. Intelligence officers and military investigators do not typically present as physically ill, pale, or unfamiliar with ordinary social conventions. Keel concluded from his research that the MIB were not conventional government agents, but represented what he called an ultra-terrestrial phenomenon, entities operating in human-adjacent but not fully human form, associated with high-strangeness encounters rather than a government program. Researchers who have examined this evidence have described it as genuinely difficult to explain within the accepted framework. These are not fringe commentators. They are credentialed academics publishing in mainstream journals, raising questions that the field has not yet satisfactorily answered. Then there is the matter of government surveillance of UFO researchers was real and is documented. FOIA requests produced FBI and Air Force documents showing civilian UFO researchers and organizations were monitored by intelligence agencies in the 1950 and 1960s. Project Blue Book, the U.S. Air Force's official UFO investigation, active 1952 to 1969, investigated civilian sightings, and in some cases, investigators visited witnesses in person. This provides a partial mundane explanation for some MIB encounters, while not accounting for the inhuman physical descriptions. What makes this particularly significant is its independence from the previous points. This is not a case of one theory requiring another. These are separate lines of evidence converging on the same uncomfortable conclusion. Adding to the enigma is this finding. The 1997 Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones film Men in Black was based on a Marvel Comics series inspired by MIB reports from the 1950s. The film popularized a comedic version of the MIB concept globally. Researchers studying the phenomenon since 1997 have noted that post-film MIB reports increasingly resemble the film's version, friendly agents in Ray-Ban sunglasses, rather than the disturbing, physically abnormal visitors described by pre-film witnesses. Separating genuine pre-film reports from culturally contaminated post-film accounts is now a significant methodological problem in the field. Taken together, these facts form a pattern that cannot be explained by coincidence, misidentification, or methodological error. Each piece of evidence has been examined by skeptics. Each has been subjected to alternative explanations. And in each case, the alternative explanation falls short of accounting for everything that has been documented. We are left with a body of evidence that demands explanation and an accepted narrative that does not provide one. This is where serious inquiry begins. Now that we have established the evidence, we need to examine the theories that researchers have proposed to explain Men in Black. What witnesses actually reported before the movie existed. This is where the debate becomes most intense, because the theories reflect not just different interpretations of the same evidence, but fundamentally different assumptions about what is possible and what the past looked like. Understanding these theories is not just an academic exercise. Each one has been championed by serious researchers with genuine credentials, and each one captures something that the others miss. The truth, if it is ever established, will likely draw on elements of several. The first major explanation proposed by researchers holds that Men in Black are government agents, CIA, NSA, Air Force, or other intelligence personnel, silencing UFO witnesses to protect classified programs such as advanced aircraft testing, most common interpretation, supported by documented government surveillance of UFO researchers. The main objection: professional intelligence officers would not present as physically ill, pale, stilted in speech, or unfamiliar with ordinary objects. The inhuman characteristics consistently reported across independent witnesses are inconsistent with any known government operational profile. This interpretation has significant academic support and is backed by substantial evidence, but it is not without problems. Critics point out that it requires assumptions that go beyond what the evidence strictly supports, and that key predictions of this theory have not been confirmed by subsequent research. It remains contested, and the contest is productive. A rival school of thought argues that Men in Black represent an interdimensional or ultra-terrestrial phenomenon, entities that take human-adjacent form but are not fully human, associated with the broader pattern of high-strangeness encounters. John Keel's conclusion, published 1970-1975. The main objection: this explanation is unfalsifiable and relies on a category, ultra-terrestrial entities, that has no independent evidential basis. Keel's witnesses may have been misperceiving or experiencing psychological effects rather than encountering actual non-human visitors. This theory is controversial, and deliberately so. Its proponents argue that the evidence demands an explanation outside the conventional framework. Critics counter that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and that the evidence presented, while suggestive, does not yet meet that standard. The debate continues in peer-reviewed literature. Perhaps the most unconventional theory suggests that the MIB phenomenon is a psychological or sociological effect. The encounters are real experiences, but the visitors are human individuals whose behavior is interpreted through a framework shaped by encounter stress or altered perception. Early cases established a template later witnesses unconsciously followed. The main objection: independent pre-film witnesses described identical characteristics without prior exposure to the MIB template, suggesting either a consistent real stimulus or a more complex cultural transmission mechanism than simple template following. What is striking about this debate is not merely that experts disagree. That is normal and healthy in science. What is striking is the quality of the disagreement. Serious researchers working from the same body of evidence, reaching genuinely different conclusions. That level of fundamental disagreement, when it persists over decades, is a signal that something important has not yet been understood. The question is not which of these theories is right. The question is whether any of them is right, or whether the truth is something that none of the current frameworks has yet been able to capture. The case surrounding Men in Black, what witnesses actually reported before the movie existed, does not rest on speculation alone. What distinguishes this investigation from pure mythology is the existence of documented, physical, verifiable evidence, material that has been examined by credentialed researchers and whose authenticity is not seriously disputed. What is disputed is its interpretation. Let us review the most significant documented evidence as objectively as possible. We are not going to cherry-pick the data that supports a preferred conclusion. We are going to lay out what exists and let you draw your own assessment. Physical evidence supporting this account includes Keel's documentation across dozens of independent witnesses, described in the Mothman Prophecies and the Eighth Tower, both 1975, showed consistent MIB characteristics being reported by people with no knowledge of each other and no prior exposure to MIB descriptions. The consistency of pale skin, black Cadillacs, stilted speech, and apparent unfamiliarity with ordinary objects across geographically separate witnesses is the primary evidence that something consistent was being encountered, whatever its ultimate nature. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. Investigators have documented. FOIA-released FBI and Air Force documents confirm that civilian UFO researchers were monitored and sometimes visited by government investigators in the 1950s and 1960s. Project Blue Book personnel did interview civilian witnesses. Air Force investigators visited civilian researchers and in some cases pressured them to be less public. This documented government activity provides a real basis for some MIB reports, particularly those where information access was the most striking feature rather than inhuman physical characteristics. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. On-site analysis revealed. Nick Redfern's The Real Men in Black, 2011, is the most systematic modern survey of MIB cases, examining pre-film reports separately from post-film accounts and identifying the most evidentially solid pre-1997 cases. Redfern's analysis finds the earliest cases: Maury Island, 1947, Bender, 1953, and Keel's 1960s, 1970s documentation, most compelling because witnesses had no cultural template for what they described. The physical abnormality descriptions cluster in early cases and become rarer in post-film reports, tending to support their authenticity as anomalous experiences rather than cultural borrowing. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. Each individual piece of evidence might, in principle, be explained away. A single anomalous artifact might be misidentified. A single anomalous date might reflect contamination. A single anomalous eyewitness account might reflect misperception. The question is whether all of the evidence can be explained away, and whether the explanations required are more or less plausible than the evidence itself. When multiple independent lines of inquiry converge on the same conclusion, that convergence is the most powerful signal in empirical science. And that is exactly what we are seeing here. We have examined the history, the evidence, and the theories surrounding Men in Black, what witnesses actually reported before the movie existed. Now we need to ask the question that is sometimes overlooked in discussions of ancient mysteries. Why does this matter? What does it mean for us today? It would be easy to file this away as an interesting historical curiosity, a puzzle from a distant past with no bearing on our present lives. That would be a fundamental mistake. The questions raised by this case touch on issues that are directly relevant to who we are, where we came from, and what the human story actually looks like before the period covered by conventional history. Men in Black as a pre-film phenomenon was documented in the 1950s and extensively researched by Keel in the 1970s, long before Will Smith made the concept globally famous. FOIA releases confirm government surveillance of UFO researchers, but do not explain the inhuman physical descriptions. Nick Redfern's 2011 survey remains the most comprehensive modern analysis. The 1997 film has made distinguishing genuine historical witness accounts from pop culture-influenced reports methodologically difficult. MIB encounters continue to be reported. The earliest cases, with their consistent and deeply strange physical descriptions, remain the most difficult to explain as simple government harassment. Whatever Albert Bender encountered in 1953, it frightened him enough to shut down everything he had built. Furthermore, the tools available to investigate these questions are advancing rapidly. Satellite imaging, ground-penetrating radar, ancient DNA analysis, isotopic tracing, and deep-sea sonar are all providing capabilities that previous generations of researchers could only dream of. Cases that were genuinely unresolvable 10 years ago are now open to new analysis, and the findings, consistently, are expanding rather than contracting the mystery. The investigation continues. New discoveries are being made. New analyses are being published. New voices are entering the conversation from disciplines that were not previously part of the discussion. The answers, when they come, and they will come, will not merely solve a historical puzzle. They will force a fundamental revision of assumptions that underpin our entire understanding of human history and human potential. We have now walked through the complete case of Men in Black, what witnesses actually reported before the movie existed from the historical record, through the physical evidence across the competing theories and into the modern significance of what remains unresolved. What the story of Men in Black ultimately reveals is not just a historical puzzle. It is a mirror. It reflects our assumptions back at us, our assumptions about what ancient people were capable of, about how knowledge is gained and lost across the centuries, and about the relationship between what we know and what we merely think we know. The evidence presented in this documentary is real. The questions it raises are genuine. The debate among researchers is ongoing, and that is healthy. Science is not a set of conclusions. It is a process. And the process requires that we remain open to evidence that challenges what we thought we knew, however uncomfortable that challenge might be. If you came to this documentary as a skeptic, we hope the evidence gave you something to think about. If you came as a true believer, we hope the critical examination gave you a more nuanced picture. The truth, as always, lies in the evidence, not in what we want to be true. Thank you for watching. If this investigation sparked your curiosity, please subscribe to the channel. We publish new documentaries every week, covering the full range of historical mysteries that the mainstream has not yet adequately explained. Leave a comment below telling us which case you want us to investigate next. The conversation continues. The investigation never ends.